Welcome to the Occult Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we descend into the shadowed study of John Dee, royal mathematician and conjurer, who said angels taught him a language. They called it Enochian, a script of towers and keys whispered to command intelligences beyond the veil. Was it prayer, cipher, or a map to a door that should stay shut? If words shape reality, what happens when the words are not human and the room answers back? In the late 16th century, England stood on the threshold of empire. Elizabeth I sat on the throne, her court a careful balance of political intrigue, religious tension, and dangerous curiosity. Beneath the surface of diplomacy and trade, there was a quiet hunger for knowledge older than nations, knowledge that could grant power over fate itself. This was the world that shaped John Dee. He was not merely a mathematician or astrologer. He was a man who moved between the courts of kings and the cloisters of alchemists. Dee's reputation as a scholar was matched only by whispers of his involvement in the occult, whispers that clung to him no matter how often he presented himself as a man of faith. Dee's personal library was one of the largest in England, rivaling that of the universities, filled with rare manuscripts on Hermetic philosophy, Kabbalistic texts, and medieval grimoires. He sought patterns where others saw chaos, linking mathematics, language, and magic as parts of the same divine architecture. Yet, despite his genius, Dee was unsatisfied. The truths he found in books felt incomplete, as if vital pages had been torn away in some ancient act of censorship. The political climate made such pursuits perilous. England's break with Rome had created a volatile religious landscape. To dabble too openly in mystical study risked accusations of heresy, treason, or witchcraft. For Dee, this was not idle superstition. It was the shadow of the stake and the rope. Still, he pressed forward, believing that the deepest truths of creation had been deliberately hidden, and that reclaiming them could restore humanity's lost connection to the divine. It was during this period of restless seeking that Dee became convinced he needed direct communication with higher intelligences. Not allegories or interpretations, but literal conversation with the angels themselves. The idea was rooted in the belief that Adam, the first man, had been given a pure language by God, a language capable of shaping the natural and spiritual worlds. Over time, humanity had lost it. If Dee could recover that language, he believed, it would be a key to unlocking not only divine wisdom, but also the machinery of creation itself. To achieve this, he would need a way to bridge the vast gulf between human perception and the celestial realms. Books alone could not do it. Dee required a scryer, someone capable of seeing and hearing what lay beyond the visible world, a seer who could open the gateway between realms. And when that man finally appeared, everything in Dee's life, and perhaps in England's fate, began to shift. Edward Kelley arrived in John Dee's life like a shadow cast across a bright floor. Accounts of his past were murky, a blend of rumour and contradiction. Some said he had been a scholar expelled from Oxford. Others whispered he had been caught for forgery or grave robbing. What is certain is that by the time he stood in Dee's home in Mortlake in the year 1582, Kelley possessed the confidence of a man who believed he could see beyond the veil. Kelley claimed he could gaze into a polished crystal, a so-called shoe stone, and witness visions of angels. For Dee, this was the missing instrument. If Kelley's gift was real, it could serve as the medium through which divine beings might transmit the lost Adamic language. Dee was meticulous. Each session was carefully recorded, with Dee asking questions and Kelley relaying the angelic responses as they appeared in the shimmering depths of the crystal. The angels that Kelley described were not vague apparitions. They gave names, spoke with authority, and delivered complex messages. They identified themselves as messengers of God, tasked with revealing to Dee the celestial tongue. Over weeks and months, these sessions produced a growing lexicon of strange words and symbols, accompanied by intricate grids known as tablets or calls. Dee transcribed them with reverence, convinced that each was a fragment of the original language spoken before the fall. But this was more than translation. The angels instructed Dee in rituals, tools, and invocations that could summon them at will. They spoke of a cosmic structure, a hierarchy of beings, and a system of magic that operated on principles unknown to man. It was a vision of the universe as an interconnected network of spiritual forces, where precise words and symbols acted like keys to invisible locks. The content was dangerous, not because of open blasphemy, but because it blurred the lines between divine revelation and forbidden sorcery. Dee believed it was holy work, yet the angels also spoke of apocalyptic change, of purging the world of corruption through fire and upheaval. These were not messages the Crown or the Church would welcome. Still, Dee pressed onward. His house became a private temple, the crystal sessions unfolding like a long negotiation between human and angel. And slowly a question began to form. If these beings were indeed what they claimed, why had they chosen John Dee and Edward Kelley? And if they were not angels, what kind of intelligence had he invited into his life? The records from Dee's journals reveal a pattern that is as unsettling as it is methodical. The angelic communications were not random bursts of inspiration, but structured transmissions. Kelley, staring to the crystal, would describe elaborate visions, towers of fire, wheels within wheels, vast cities made of glass and gold. From these visions came long sequences of letters, dictated one at a time, often backwards or arranged in complex grids. Dee painstakingly copied each one, building what would later be called the Enochian alphabet. The angels claimed this script was the purest form of speech ever given to mankind, the very language through which God spoke creation into being. It was said to hold power not just in meaning, but in vibration, that the act of speaking it aloud could alter reality itself. The words were paired with ritual instructions, specific prayers, precise gestures, the placement of magical tools such as the Holy Table, the Sigillum Dei Amith, and the Laman. Dee treated these instructions with the precision of a scientist. He measured, calculated, and refined every detail. The Holy Table, for example, was inscribed with geometric designs and the names of angels, positioned in exact alignment to the cardinal directions. The Sigillum Dei Amith, a wax seal covered in intricate symbols, was placed under the crystal as a foundation for the work. Each step was meant to create a perfect microcosm, a mirror of the divine order, so that the angels could manifest without distortion. The sessions produced not only the alphabet, but also a series of calls or keys, long incantations said to open gates to various levels of the heavens. Each key was tied to a specific function, summoning particular orders of angels, revealing hidden truths, or exerting influence over the elements. These were not vague mystical poems, they were operational commands, written in a language no one outside of Dee's circle had ever heard. Yet as the system grew more elaborate, so too did the demands from the voices on the other side. The angels began to dictate personal instructions to Dee and Kelley, directives that sometimes conflicted with Dee's own moral or religious beliefs. Still, he obeyed, convinced that failure to comply would sever the connection and lose forever the knowledge he sought. The sheer scale of the material was staggering. By the late 1580s, Dee had filled volumes with Enochian letters, tables, and ritual procedures. It was a complete magical system, something unlike anything preserved from the ancient world, and it had arrived not from study of old books, but from what Dee believed was direct, supernatural contact. The question of what door he was building, and what might come through it, was becoming impossible to ignore. What emerged from Dee's work with Kelley was more than a private mystical practice. The Enochian system contained patterns that seemed to echo across cultures and centuries, as if fragments of the same hidden architecture had been scattered through time. The great elemental tablets, for instance, vast grids filled with letters that could be combined into divine names, mirrored the structure of magical squares found in medieval grimoires and even in certain forms of Islamic talismanic magic. The Sigillum Dei Ameth itself bore striking resemblance to earlier diagrams in European and Middle Eastern occult traditions, suggesting that this knowledge had surfaced before in altered forms, only to be buried again. Even older parallels emerged when scholars compared Dee's recorded visions with ancient texts. The angel's description of a cosmic order of 4 watchtowers, each guarding a cardinal direction, echoed not only the Book of Revelation, but also pre-Christian pagan systems that assigned divine guardians to the quarters of the world. Similar motifs appear in Native American medicine wheels, in Hindu mandalas, and in the protective deities of Tibetan Buddhism. How could such parallels exist in cultures supposedly separated by vast oceans and millennia? The language itself held peculiar resonances. Some words in Enochian bore structural similarities to Hebrew, others to Latin, and still others to languages with no documented connection to the European tradition. To believers, this was evidence of a root tongue, a proto-language older than recorded history. To skeptics, it was a sign that Kelley, consciously or unconsciously, was blending elements from languages he had heard or read about. Yet the precision and consistency of the system made it difficult to dismiss outright. The visions also shared imagery with earlier mystical literature. Towers of light rising from oceans, books of fire that could not be read by mortal eyes, wheels of living flame, all of these could be found in Jewish Merkaba mysticism, Gnostic scriptures, and certain apocryphal texts. In each case, the imagery was not merely symbolic. It was said to describe an actual architecture of the unseen world, a place structured as carefully as any earthly city, with gates, courts, and chambers, each requiring specific keys. Dee may not have known all of these parallels, but if the angels were real, perhaps they were speaking a universal symbolic language. And if they were not, the source of Kelley's visions was drawing from a reservoir of symbols that transcended culture and time. Either possibility suggested a truth that mainstream history could not comfortably explain. By the closing years of the 1580s, word of Dee's angelic communications had begun to leak beyond the safety of his study. While some courtiers and nobles viewed him as a brilliant if eccentric man of learning, others saw danger in his work. England's universities and church authorities had little patience for pursuits that blurred the boundary between pious devotion and ceremonial magic. Publicly, such matters were dismissed as superstition or fraud, but privately they were treated as potential heresy. The academic establishment of the time clung tightly to the accepted frameworks of knowledge: classical philosophy, biblical scholarship, and the emerging natural sciences. Anything that suggested hidden languages, spiritual hierarchies, or operative magic was considered either delusion or outright threat. Dee's claims that he was receiving divine revelation in a tongue unknown to the world challenged not only theological authority, but also the carefully policed borders of acceptable inquiry. Funding and patronage were essential for scholars in Dee's era, and both were controlled by institutions that could withdraw support at the faintest whiff of controversy. A charge of sorcery, even without trial, could end a career and invite dangerous scrutiny. For this reason, most learned men avoided topics that carried even the scent of occultism. Dee, however, was moving in the opposite direction, deepening his dependence on material that the guardians of orthodoxy deemed perilous. The written records of the angelic sessions posed their own problem. To the uninitiated, the Enochian language looked like a cipher, and the tables of letters resembled the codes used in political espionage. This was not a trivial risk. At a time when England's enemies included Catholic powers like Spain, secret communications could easily be framed as treason. Dee's system, whatever its true purpose, could be misrepresented as a tool for foreign plots. The official position of both church and academy was to dismiss such work as the product of misguided imagination. Yet the very intensity of that dismissal suggested something more, a determination to prevent these ideas from gaining legitimacy. Scholars who strayed too close to similar material often found their reputations quietly destroyed, their manuscripts lost, their names omitted from future histories. Whether by coincidence or design, the result was the same. The wall around Enochian magic grew higher, and fewer dared to look over it. In that climate, Dee's persistence seemed almost reckless. But to him, abandoning the work would have meant discarding the most important discovery of his life. A discovery that, in his mind, had been entrusted to him by beings from beyond the human world. Outside the guarded language of academic rebuttal, other voices began to interpret Dee's work in far more radical terms. Among the growing body of fringe thinkers and esoteric practitioners, the Enochian system was seen not as a metaphor or a pious curiosity, but as a literal technology of contact. They argued that Dee and Kelley had not merely been speaking to angels in the theological sense, but to intelligences inhabiting other planes of existence, beings that could be non-human, extra-dimensional, or even from other worlds. Some proposed that the elaborate structure of the calls and tablets was more than symbolic. They viewed it as a map, a multi-dimensional coordinate system that, when spoken and enacted precisely, could align the practitioner with specific points in a vast cosmic network. In this reading, each gate, opened by a call, was not simply a visionary state, but an actual portal into a separate realm. If true, Dee's work would represent one of the earliest documented attempts at systematic interdimensional communication in Western history. Others took the idea further still, suggesting that the beings Dee contacted were not bound by the categories of angel or demon, but were part of a continuum of intelligences that had interacted with humanity for millennia under many names. The descriptions of shining towers, living wheels, and cities of crystal sounded to them less like medieval Christian iconography and more like encounters with advanced non-terrestrial civilizations, entities whose technology might appear magical to humans of the 16th century. There were also darker interpretations. Some occultists warned that Dee's apparent obedience to the voices in the crystal mirrored the patterns found in accounts of spirit possession or manipulation. They speculated that the Enochian language, with its vibratory precision, might function as a kind of energetic tuning fork, capable of opening channels to realms that were not inherently benevolent. In such a view, Dee's angels could have been opportunistic entities using his devotion to anchor themselves in the physical world. To these theorists, the risks were as great as the potential rewards. If the Enochian system was indeed a form of advanced spiritual technology, then misuse, or even casual experimentation, could destabilize the practitioner's mind, body, or environment. The notion that certain sequences of words and symbols could alter the very fabric of reality was both intoxicating and terrifying. Whether as an instrument of divine communion, alien contact, or psychic engineering, the Enochian framework invited one unavoidable question. If a door was opened, could it ever be fully closed again? In the years and centuries that followed Dee's death, his Enochian manuscripts passed through many hands, some scholarly, some deeply secretive. Portions of the material were copied, altered, and reinterpreted, while other sections vanished entirely. This was not the kind of disappearance that happens by accident. Pages were deliberately removed, entire volumes went missing, and certain diagrams were crudely defaced. The surviving records hint at a much larger body of work than what has reached modern eyes. Institutions with both the means and the motive to control such material have long histories of selective preservation. The libraries of major universities, the private collections of noble families, and the vaults of religious orders have all been accused of holding occult manuscripts away from public view. During periods of political upheaval, confiscation and destruction of heretical works were common. A single decree could erase decades of study. In some cases, books thought lost in fires or raids would later reappear in the inventories of private collectors, sometimes centuries later, raising questions about whether they had ever been truly destroyed. The erasure of knowledge is not only physical. Misinformation and ridicule can serve the same purpose. By framing Dee as a misguided eccentric or by portraying Kelley as a fraud, later historians created a narrative that discouraged serious engagement with the material. The stigma around Enochian studies grew so strong that even those who believed in its authenticity often worked in isolation, publishing little and avoiding public discussion. Some occult traditions claim that fragments of the system were deliberately seeded into other magical orders, stripped of their full context to make them less dangerous or less powerful. There are whispered accounts of ceremonial groups in the 17th and 18th centuries using Enochian calls in heavily modified form, always behind closed doors, and always under oath of secrecy. Whether these were survivals of Dee's original system or distorted echoes is impossible to say. The idea that knowledge could be intentionally dismantled and scattered suggests a deliberate strategy. By breaking the whole into pieces, no single person could wield its full potential. This is a pattern seen in other traditions as well. the hidden chambers of ancient temples, the guarded oral teachings of indigenous shamans, the initiation rites of mystery schools. The underlying logic is the same. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be left in one place or in the hands of the unprepared. If this was the fate of Enochian magic, then the surviving fragments may be only shadows of a system that was once whole, its missing parts perhaps locked away, forgotten by design, or waiting for someone reckless enough to piece them together again. If the Enochian system truly operated as its records suggest, its implications stretch far beyond the boundaries of Elizabethan magic. At its core lies the assertion that language is not merely a tool for communication, but a technology, one capable of shaping perception, altering consciousness, and perhaps even restructuring reality itself. If such a language once existed in its pure form, as Dee believed, then reclaiming it could mean reclaiming a lost human capacity to directly interface with creation. In spiritual terms, this challenges the hierarchy of power. If individuals could invoke divine or cosmic forces without the mediation of church or state, the central structures of authority would lose their monopoly over the sacred. Enochian magic, whether divine revelation or otherworldly transmission, presented a path to sovereignty over one's own spiritual experience. That alone would be reason enough for institutions to suppress it. From a more esoteric perspective, the system suggests that reality is layered, that what we perceive as the material world is only one plane in a much larger, multidimensional structure. The detailed maps contained in Dee's tablets and calls outline a universe organized with mathematical precision, where each realm or zone is accessible through specific sequences of sound and symbol. This is a vision of existence not as a chaotic accident, but as a navigable construct. If such navigation is possible, it raises profound questions. Could the mind itself act as a vehicle between worlds? Could ritual speech alter the parameters of the environment, not metaphorically, but in a measurable physical way? And if so, what else? What else might be engineered through mastery of such a system? There is also the unsettling possibility that once contact is established, it is never entirely broken. Some occultists argue that the Enochian calls function like an address in a cosmic network, and that uttering them again, even centuries later, could reopen dormant lines of communication. This means that Dee's work might not be a relic of the past, but an active channel still echoing through the fabric of the present. Whether seen as sacred gift or dangerous weapon, the Enochian system forces a re-examination of what language, consciousness, and reality truly are. And if even part of it is authentic, then the story of human history and our place within it may be far stranger and far older than we have been led to believe. John Dee died in relative obscurity in the early years of the 17th century. His reputation diminished, his life's work scattered. Edward Kelley's fate was no less grim, ending in imprisonment and a mysterious death. The system they laboured to record remained incomplete, shrouded in both mystery and deliberate distortion. Yet the fragments that survive continue to exert a strange pull. Scholars, occultists and seekers still pore over Dee's journals, tracing the curves of the Enochian letters, reciting the calls, attempting to reconstruct the architecture of a universe that may never have been meant for human hands. Some approach it as a sacred trust, a divine inheritance stolen from humanity and hidden away. Others see it as a perilous engine, a device for altering reality that could as easily destroy as enlighten. A few dismiss it as an elaborate deception, yet even they must contend with the precision of the system, the consistency of its inner logic, and the fact that elements of it mirror symbols and patterns found in cultures far removed from Elizabethan England. In modern ceremonial magic, Enochian elements surface again and again, adapted into the rituals of secret societies, woven into the experiments of solitary practitioners. Reports of strange visions, altered states, and unexplained phenomena follow these experiments, echoing the accounts Dee himself recorded more than 4 centuries ago. Whether these are products of the mind or evidence of genuine contact remains an open question, one that perhaps can never be answered to the satisfaction of all. The deeper question may be one of intention. If the Enochian language and its associated rites are indeed a technology, then its ultimate effect depends on the will and understanding of the one who uses it. A key can open a door to a sanctuary or to a prison. The act of speaking a word may be the act of shaping the world, for better or worse. And once spoken, some words cannot be taken back. Perhaps that is the lingering legacy of John Dee's work, the reminder that knowledge and power are inseparable, and that the boundaries we believe to be fixed between the physical and the spiritual, the known and the unknown, may be far thinner than we imagine. The language of angels, if it exists, may still be waiting in the spaces between letters, ready for the one who dares to speak it aloud. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Occult Knowledge Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.